Surplus CS Simple Explanation, developed by Alfred Marshall. Concept: consumers are ready to pay more for a product than its actual price. The extra benefit they get is called consumer surplus. 1. Definition by Marshall. Consumer surplus is the excess of the price a consumer is willing to pay over what he actually pays. Formula: consumer surplus equals what a consumer is ready to pay, what he actually pays. 2. Simple example. Imagine you go to buy a shirt. You are willing to pay $1,000, but the shop sells it for $700. Your surplus, extra gain, equals $1,000 minus $700 equals $300. This $300 is your consumer surplus. Key idea: you paid less than what you were ready to pay. You got an extra benefit surplus. Why does consumer surplus exist? Because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, DMU. The first unit of a product gives the highest satisfaction. As we buy more, satisfaction from each extra unit decreases. We continue buying until the last unit's utility equals price. But for previous units, we get extra benefit, consumer surplus. Example: your first burger gives 100% satisfaction, but the second gives less. You are willing to pay $150 for the first burger, but only $120 for the second. If the actual price is $100, you get $50 surplus on the first burger and $20 on the second. 4 key points to remember. 1. Developed by Alfred Marshall. 2. CS equals willing price, actual price. DMU concept: more we have, less value we give. 4. Exists in perfect competition. 5. Higher surplus, more happiness. 5. Short trick to remember. Keyword: W, willing to pay more. A, actual payment, less. DMU, diminishing marginal utility. H, happiness, surplus, extra benefit. Less value as we buy more. Trick word: ward. Read as waddle. Ducks waddle happily when they get extra food, just like consumers feel happy with extra savings. Assumptions of consumer surplus CS. Simple explanation. These are the conditions under which consumer surplus is calculated. Utility can be measured. We assume utility, satisfaction, can be measured in numbers, utils. Example: a pizza slice gives 10 utils. A burger gives 8 utils. 2. Marginal utility of money is constant. The value of 1 remains the same for the consumer. Example: 10 today equals 10 tomorrow. No inflation effect. No change in income, taste, and preference. The consumer's income and choices don't change while buying. Example: if you love chocolates, your liking remains the same. Test 4. No substitute available. The product does not have a similar alternative. Example: if you want Coca-Cola, you don't consider Pepsi. Independent utility of each unit. Every unit provides its own satisfaction. Example: eating 2 burgers gives double satisfaction. No mix-up with other items. 6. Law of diminishing marginal utility, DMU, applies. More quantity, less satisfaction from extra units. Example: first pizza slice, super tasty. 5th slice, not as exciting. 10th slice, no more hunger. Short trick to remember. U, utility, can be measured. Mem, money utility, is constant. I, income, taste, and preference are constant. N, no substitute available. S, separate independent utility for each unit. I, important law, DMU works. Trick word: UMINC, sounds like UMINC. Think of U, consumer surplus. Measuring consumer surplus using the demand curve. Consumer surplus can be understood using a demand curve. It shows how much consumers are willing to pay versus how much they actually pay in the market. 1. Concept of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus: what you are willing to pay, what you actually pay. Example: you are ready to pay $100 for a movie ticket. The actual ticket price is 80. Your consumer surplus equals decimals 100, 80 equals 20 extra benefit. 2. Demand curve representation. The demand curve shows different prices that consumers are willing to pay for a product. The market price is what they actually pay. 3. Graph explanation. Imagine a toll bridge where P price, toll fee for crossing the bridge, Q quantity, number of vehicles using the bridge. Triangle PNBA, consumer surplus, extra benefit for users. Rectangle OQBPin, revenue, what consumers actually pay. Formula for consumer surplus equals area of the triangle, frac 1, 2 times text height. 4. Short trick to remember, keyword bridge, example used. I. Individual's willingness to pay. D. Demand curve concept. Trick word, bid. Think of people bidding in an auction where they reveal what they are willing to pay. How higher price reduces consumer surplus. Concept. When the price of a product or service increases, the consumer surplus decreases because consumers pay more and get less benefit from the purchase. One example, telephone service. Before price increase, monthly rent equals P, consumer gets OX units of telephone service. Consumer surplus equals A plus B, extra benefit received. After price increase, monthly rent increases to P yin, consumer now consumes less OX in units. Consumer surplus is now only B, reduced benefit. Loss in consumer surplus equals area A. Conclusion. Higher price, lower usage, less consumer surplus, loss in welfare. Graph explanation. X-axis telephone service quantity used. Y-axis equals monthly rent price. Consumer surplus before price increase A plus B. Consumer surplus after price increase equals only B. Lost surplus due to price hike, area A. 3. Short trick to remember, cut. C. Consumer surplus decreases. U. Now T. Telephone service example. Trick word, higher price cuts consumer surplus. Practical uses of consumer surplus. Concept. Consumer surplus is useful in many areas like taxation, pricing, trade, and economic welfare. It helps governments, businesses, and economists make better decisions. Choice of taxes. Direct tax, like income tax, is better than indirect tax, like GST, because direct tax only reduces satisfaction from a few goods. Indirect tax reduces satisfaction from many goods, so people suffer more. Example. A person paying $1,000 as income tax gives up only some luxuries, but if $1,000 is added to petrol tax, all petrol users suffer. Importance to Finance Minister. Indirect taxes increase government revenue but reduce consumer surplus. Subsidies should be given to industries with increasing returns to maximize consumer benefits. Example, taxing alcohol, luxury, is better than taxing milk. Essential. Value in use versus value in exchange. Some goods have high use value but low price, newspaper, salt, matchbox. Others have high exchange value due to scarcity, gold, diamonds. Example, salt is essential but cheap, while diamonds are not essential but expensive. Importance to monopolist. A monopolist can charge high prices for products with high consumer surplus. Example, Apple charges premium prices because iPhones have high perceived value. International trade. Import scarce goods to increase consumer surplus. Export abundant goods to earn foreign exchange. Tax cheap imports to reduce excessive foreign dependence. Example, India imports oil scarce and exports rice abundant. 6. Economic welfare. Government policies should focus on increasing consumer surplus to improve welfare. Example, free education and healthcare increase consumer surplus and economic well-being. 7. Pricing of public utilities. Essential services, electricity, water, transport, should not be priced only based on cost. Pricing should consider consumer surplus to ensure fair access. Example, lower fares for public transport help the poor. Short trick to remember. Keyword TIMVEP. T, taxes. Direct tax better than indirect. I, international trade, import scarce, export abundant. M, monopolist pricing. Higher surplus, higher price. V, value in use versus value in exchange, salt versus diamonds. E, economic welfare. More consumer surplus equals better life. P, public utility pricing. Fair pricing for all. P, finance minister. Tax right, give subsidies. Trick word, TIMVEP, who gets special benefits just like consumer surplus. Criticisms of consumer surplus. Concept. Consumer surplus is useful, but economists criticize it for being unrealistic and difficult to measure. Utility cannot be measured. Problem. Marshall's concept assumes that we can measure happiness, utility, in numbers, which is impossible. Example. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10 after drinking coffee? Hard to say, right? Yes, unrealistic assumptions. It assumes money has constant value, not true. Each product's usefulness is separate, not true. Example, 100 today, 100 in the future due to inflation. 3. Ignores income effect. A rich person is willing to pay more than a poor person. Consumer surplus depends on income levels, which the theory ignores. Example, a millionaire may pay $500 for a coffee, but a student won't. 4. Money's value changes. As people spend money, the remaining money becomes more valuable to them. Consumer surplus doesn't account for this. Example, a person with 1,000 feels 100 is a small amount, but a person with 200 sees 100 as a big loss. Doesn't work for luxury and giffen goods. Luxury items, e.g. Rolex watches, people buy them to show off, not for utility. Giffen goods, e.g. cheap staple foods, demand increases when price increases, unlike normal goods. Example, a rich person may buy a 10 lakh car just because it's expensive. Necessities have infinite consumer surplus. Some products are so essential that people will pay anything for them. Consumer surplus becomes meaningless. Example, a person will sell everything for life-saving medicine. 7. Assumes no substitutes. In reality, most goods have substitutes, which affects consumer surplus. If substitutes exist, people won't pay high prices. Example, if Coca-Cola is expensive, people will buy Pepsi. 8. Vague concept. Different places, different values. 1,000 in a village is worth more than 1,000 in a city. Difficult to compare utility across people and places. Example, 1,000 means a lot to a farmer, but little to a CEO. Short trick to remember. Keyword UIM-LNGSV. Utility can't be measured. I, ignores income effect. M, money value changes. L, luxury and giffen goods. N, necessities have infinite surplus. G, goods have substitutes. St, surplus is vague. V, very unrealistic assumptions. Trick word, UIM-LNGSV. Think of UIM long save. This concept is long and hard to save from criticisms. (2.9) Exercise. 2.91 Short answer type questions. 1. What are the objectives of demand analysis? 2. Explain the two types of demand. 3. Write a note on demand function. 4. What are the assumptions of the law of demand? 5. Explain the types of demand schedules. 6. Explain the role of elasticity of demand in decision-making. 7. What are the types degrees of price elasticity? 8. Differentiate between price elasticity and income elasticity of demand. 9. Discuss cross-elasticity of demand. 10. State the factors affecting demand estimation forecasting. 11. What is demand forecasting? Mention its importance. 12. Define consumer choice behavior. 13. What is utility? How is it measured? 14. State the assumptions of the cardinal utility approach. 15. Explain the law of diminishing marginal utility. 16. Criticize the indifference curve analysis. 17. Differentiate between the cardinal and ordinal approaches. 18. Discuss marginal rate of substitution and indifference map. 19. What is the significance of revealed preference theory? To explain the assumptions of consumer surplus. 21. How does a higher price reduce consumer surplus? Explain. Statute 2.92. Long answer type questions. 1. Define the term demand. Illustrate the determinants and types of demand. 2. Explain the law of demand in detail. 3. Discuss the various types of elasticity of demand. 4. Explain the demand curve. Why does the demand curve slope downwards? 5. Discuss the exceptions to the law of demand. Also explain the variations in increase-decrease in demand. 6. What is elasticity of demand? Explain the various types of elasticity of demand. 7. What is price elasticity of demand? Discuss the factors and methods of measuring price elasticity of demand. 8. Elaborate on the techniques of demand estimation forecasting. 9. What is consumer choice? Discuss the theory of consumer choice, consumer behavior in detail. 10. What is the cardinal utility approach? Critically examine the criticisms and approaches of the cardinal utility approach. 11. Explain consumer equilibrium with the help of the indifference curve technique. 12. What is an indifference curve and an indifference schedule? Explain the different properties of an indifference curve. 13. Explain the price consumption curve and income consumption curve. 14. Describe the theory of revealed preference with a diagrammatic representation. 15. Explain consumer surplus. Explain the practical usefulness and criticisms of consumer surplus.